drinking in the morning sun, blinking in the morning sun, shaking off the heavy one.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well, and I am back for our video. How about that? It's amazing. Sometimes I wonder if I'm ever going to get back to this channel, but I have finally made it back, and it does feel kind of good. So I was playing records the other night and enjoying my evening, and I pulled out 2 consecutive albums from the same year, and I thought, you know, it just got me thinking a little bit about what a wonderful year in music this happened to be. So I thought that would be a good topic for a video. And as you can see from the title, I kind of have boldly said it may be the greatest year in music of all time, that being 1979. And I think it's going to be kind of hard for anybody to argue how great of a year. I mean, you all probably have your personal favorites about, you know, your favorite year of music of all time. You know, I mean, you can think of several, just off the top of your head. 67, Summer of Love, you know, something in the 80s, you know, 77 was also a great year for music. I mean, there's many years that could qualify for this, but in my opinion, at least for today, I really think that this would be a hard argument for someone to try to convince me that this isn't the greatest year of music of all time. So I thought it would just be fun to pull out some of my favorites that I happen to have. There's a few that I wish I had. Like, I don't have a copy, believe it or not, of what a lot of people might consider the very best album of 1979, and that being The Clash, London Calling. So I'm not going to be able to show you a copy of that. I think I may have a copy of that. I just couldn't find it. It is, I think, the only Clash album I have. So it's here somewhere. I just couldn't find it, and I need to get organized a little bit better, especially with that period. But I do have a stack of about 30 things. Now, the last 10 I decided to go ahead and do a countdown on, my top 10, and I did put them in some sort of an order, but the rest of these, there's about, I don't know, 15 or 20 other albums I can show you from 1979 that are just random. They're not in any kind of order. In fact, they don't even flow the list that I have here. I did make a list up, but the only album I wasn't able to find that I thought I had, and I do think it's here somewhere, is The Clash. It wasn't a top 10 album for me. I think if you live in the UK, that album probably has more significance than people who live in this country. But still, you know, it's undeniably a great album. So, you know, it would be almost a sin not to include it in the best of 79. So anyway, I'll just get started showing records so I don't ramble on forever. But I pulled this out, and this is the debut album from Robert Fripp called Exposure. You know, you guys all know Robert Fripp mostly from King Crimson or his work with David Bowie or Brian Eno. I was reading online that he's credited to over 700 different albums throughout his nearly 50-year career in music. And he doesn't have a lot of solo albums that just have the name Robert Fripp. I think there's only 3 or 4. But this is a particularly good one from 1979 called Exposure. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go into great detail with, you know, 30 albums here to show you. But if any of these artists are new to you, or if you haven't heard their particular albums, you know, I guess you could say it has my stamp of approval. So there you have it. This one here, I've only had a copy of this album for about 6 months, maybe. And I really, until recently, wasn't a fan of their kind of popular era. But for something clicked in my head. And here in the last year or so, I've been very, very interested in enjoying early Simple Minds. And this is their 1979 album, Reel to Reel Cacophony. What an album cover, right? Basic as basic as it gets. And there's kind of somewhat of a common theme when it comes to albums of this area, at least some, that seem to have a very dark, dreary, very basic, plain cover. And this is one of them, but this is a great album, and I'm not as familiar with it as some of their more commercial albums, I guess you could say, after they made it big with Don't You Forget About Me. You know, they gained a lot of commercial popularity, and this has a completely different feel than those types of albums. But I've really grown, sorry about the glare, I didn't feel like taking these all out of the bag, so you're gonna have to put up with a little bit of glare, but Reel-to-Reel Cacophony. It's a hard word to say, isn't it? From 1979. Really good. Another one that falls into the kind of new to me category that I've really come to like this guy. And this is another guy that has like about 80 albums to his name. No joke. You could look on Discogs or Google it. This is Bill Nelson's. Bill Nelson's Red Noise, and this is Sound on Sound from 1979. And admittedly, I've only played this album 3 times because I haven't had it that long. But it's really good, and certainly would qualify for something I missed through the years. You know, it's a real shame that I'm only getting to know Bill Nelson now. But he's, from what I've got so far, I've got, I think, 6 or 7 of his records of the 80 that he's got. You know, as an artist, I'll probably never be complete on, but that's a really good one. So Bill Nelson's Red Noise, Sound on Sound, great album. Here's another one I haven't had very long. This is an artist that was by no means new to me, but kind of like Simple Minds. I never really got into their new stuff or the stuff other than maybe their hits. And this is quite an interesting album here. This is Cool for Cats by Squeeze. And another band that really seemed to change their sound a lot. And going back to their early days, I think this is their 2nd or 3rd album. This one has a very different type of feel to it. I don't know how to describe it other than to say it's a little bit risque. You know, some of the titles of the songs will give it away, like It's So Dirty and Slightly Drunk and Slap and Tickle. I mean, some of these lyrics, I mean, it's not like it's, you know, needs a parental warning on it or anything, but they're certainly suggestive. And I am pleased that they grew lyrically and got out of this phase a little bit. But nevertheless, this is a really good album and fun to listen to, so I thought I would include it in my best of 79. Now, on the other hand, contrast to some of these early ones that I've shown you that I haven't had very long, this is an album that I've had for a very long time in very different formats all through the years. This is Fleetwood Mac's Tusk, the follow-up to Rumors, the much you know, anticipated, the most expensive album of all time for a long period of time. You know, that was just one of those records that probably didn't come with bigger fanfare and bigger hype than this one, after following one of the best-selling albums of all time. And this is one that it's taken me decades to really appreciate fully. But now when you listen to this album, that it's 40 years old, you really start to appreciate it more. And I don't know what that is, but there's some really good stuff on here. And I think it's certainly underrated. And maybe it's just me, but this is an album that I always just thought it was just not that great. You know, what a serious letdown from Rumors, but it's just because it's so different than the first 2 self-titled Fleetwood Mac, and certainly different than Rumors. It was a giant leap, and I don't think the world was ready for it, but it's certainly worth revisiting now, and I think you can get a whole new appreciation for it. Here's an album that would probably make a lot of people's top 10, and one that is maybe his finest, or one of his finest albums, and this is Elvis Costello and the Attractions, Armed Forces. This is a Mobile Fidelity Sound lab pressing, obviously, and this may be the cover you guys are more familiar with. I think it, depending on where you live, this was the main cover here in the States, where I think this was meant to be the original cover, and in some countries probably was. Really outstanding album. Accidents Will Happen and Oliver's Army. You know, it's just full of good songs, and I'm not the most big, huge Elvis Costello fan, but he's got about a half a dozen records that you almost want to consider classics, and this is certainly one of them. So an album that doesn't sound 40 years old either, I must say. You know, it really still sounds like it's quite fresh, and I think that's saying a lot. Now, I did include this one, and not to create any controversy, but I think it needs to be included in the best of 79 because, you know, it's a completely different genre than everything else pretty much I'm showing you here, but this was an important album for the time, and it was a foundation for, obviously, very big things to come from Michael Jackson. This is Off the Wall, and it's just chock full of hits. You know, Quincy Jones produced, and it was the start of his massive solo career. And I know Michael Jackson is a very controversial figure right now, and a lot of people have gone off his music, and maybe rightfully so, but nevertheless, it is part of my collection, and I certainly think it's worth mentioning from a musical standpoint the importance of this album. And you know, it's just chock full of hits, and it's still enjoyable. It's kind of right at the tail end of the disco era, and has a little bit of feel still of that late 70s disco, but yet still forward thinking, and it's an important record. This album here is another. It was another grower for me. I'm a huge fan of this band. Everybody knows that, and if you look at the go back and look at the Cure ranking I did years ago, you'd see this towards the bottom, but nevertheless it's still a very important album, and obviously the springboard of great things to come for the Cure. This is Three Imaginary Boys. This is an original pressing, which sometimes is not easy to find. And yeah, I mean, it's a band that changed their sound dramatically from this point forward for the most part. It's their only album that really sounds like this, has more of a punk feel to it, and certainly different types of lyrics and short songs, and a little bit more of a rock pop edge to it, but nevertheless it is still noteworthy and still important, and I think it will go down as, I won't say a classic, but an important springboard for the Cure to launch what I consider a quite remarkable career. And now here is the album I was playing. Well, no, this isn't the one, but you're going to see another one from this artist later that was the one I was playing. The only artist that's featured twice on this list, really. Although if I dug deeper, there might be others, but Gary Numan's The Pleasure Principle came out in 1979. This is the album with Cars on it. And frankly, I think if this is a lesser album, the one that I'll show you later that is in my top 10, but when I say lesser, it's not by no means meaning it's not good. This is a fantastic album, and you know, in the late 70s, from I say 77 through obviously 1980 was his golden period, if you will, for Gary Numan, and quite groundbreaking. There was really nobody that sounded like Gary Numan at the time, and I would say very, very pioneering when it comes to synth pop and using synthetic sounds and synthesizers and music that was beginning to come into, you know, that 80s movement. You know, there was others like OMD and the list goes on, Human League, that would qualify for pioneer status, but Gary Numan, very, very, very important artist, and this is an important album, so certainly had to include that. This is the second album I pulled out from that night, kind of unknowing what I was doing, and then I was reading the liner notes and whatnot, realized, oh, it was from the same year as the other album I was just playing, and it got me thinking about making this video. And this is the Cars' Candio. This is the follow-up to their self-titled album that was, again, groundbreaking and different and something unique. And to follow that up with what a lot of people consider equally good second album is not easy to do. Certainly a dated looking kind of photo there, and look and hair and everything else, but this is full of great stuff like Let's Go and Since I Held You and Candio, fantastic song, and yeah, it's just a really, really, really good album. I played it in full the other night again for the first time in maybe a couple years, and you start to realize like that's such a talent. And you know, it went on from there. They went on to do Shake It Up and Heartbeat City, and just a powerful band. So the Cars were late 70s really staples for so many people. Now, speaking of late 70s staples, I mean, the list wouldn't be complete without including Pink Floyd's The Wall. This is I'm not going to call it an original pressing, but it is an early pressing, I'm sure, of this album. And, you know, I am not the biggest fan of Pink Floyd's The Wall, but it would, again, be almost a sin not to include it in talking about the best of 79, because, you know, it has its place in history, there's no doubt. And I think of what I'm showing you certainly is the best-selling album. Well, maybe Michael Jackson, I don't know. I mean, I think The Wall probably is the bigger seller of any album I'm showing you here, and still sells a lot of copies every single year. And, you know, there's no point talking about, you know, the story behind The Wall and the songs behind The Wall and whatnot. You've heard it 1,000 times, but I will, again, just kind of back up what I said when I did my Pink Floyd video. I'm not the biggest fan of this album. I think it kind of falls in the bottom part of their catalog. And I'm not the biggest Pink Floyd fan. There's some really, really loyal Pink Floyd fans that you know, dissect every lyric and every note and know this album like the back of their hand. That's not me. But it wouldn't be correct not to include this as a very important album for really any era, but for 1979 for sure. Then finally I pulled out this, and I have the regular record too, but I pulled out the deluxe box set of The Jam Setting Suns. This is another album that I was very late to come into. I've only had this for about 3 or 4 years. And it's quite an album, really. This is, I guess I'll just let you pause the video and see what you all get with this. There's a lot in here. And if you're interested, it's I think it's still available, but yeah, it's got a live concert from 1979 and demos and extras, and it's just chock full of stuff. Now this is on CD as well, but I thought, well, I'll show you one thing that isn't vinyl. So this is a deluxe CD box set of the Jam Setting Suns, another really important album that I was just very, very late to, and Paul Weller in general. I mean, as you can see, I've become a huge, massive fan of Paul Weller, and it's definitely on my radar to make a complete Paul Weller collections video at some point, but I just haven't got there yet because I almost feel like I'm not worthy to do it because, you know, I'm not a long-time fan. Nevertheless, I have some really cool things to show, and it will be coming sooner or later. So that gets us to the top 10, now that I've rambled on for 15 minutes. And again, this is just, you know, kind of off the top of my head. There's probably things I'm missing that I forgot to pull out that I'm going to come back to and say, oh, I should have included that for sure. But this, you know, as of today, this is the top 10 albums from the greatest year in music history. How about that? Is that dramatic enough? So let's start at number 10, and I'll give it to Wings, Paul McCartney and Wings, for Back to the Egg. It's an album I've had since the very day it came out. Not this copy, but, you know, maybe I think I've said before, this is the first album I ever bought with my own money, which may be true. I feel that's the truth anyway. Was this, or maybe the Moody Blues, Long Distance Voyager, but I'm almost sure that it was this. So anyway, a great album. A lot of people consider it among Wings' best albums. It's gotten some better appreciation over the years. Didn't do very well when it came out. Critics didn't like it. The audience didn't really take to it, but I certainly think that it has, over time, resonated with people more, and people consider it among Paul McCartney's finer solo albums, or, you know, Wings albums. So nevertheless, I put it in number 10 in my you know, dramatic ranking. So number 9 comes to, okay, here's the other album that this is really what started it all for me about the pulling out albums from 1979. Absolutely love this album. This is Gary Numan and Two Boy Army Replicas, and I put this one well ahead of the other one, and it just is better. Not saying that you know, the pleasure principle isn't great. It is, but I just enjoy this one more. And it's just a really, really amazing album, and everything I said prior to about Gary Numan certainly applies to this one. Pioneering, important, and certainly an album that started a whole movement, really. So a fantastic album. If you haven't heard that or The Pleasure Principle, really seek it out. Another one going back to my youth, and one that I've had for a long time, and kind of a sentimental type of favorite for me, is Loz Discovery. Another album that really doesn't sound like it came out in 1979 to me. It sounds more fresh, but I just maybe my very old ear saying that. But it's a great album, and, you know, they were there's so many hits on here. I think they had 5 or 6 perhaps top 10 hits on this. So what's the point of saying all the songs? You know them, and it's just a wonderful record. So if you for some reason never heard that, it's a great place to start with ELO. Among others. But here's another one I've talked about, I think, in 2 different videos. I had my friend Ross Goodall here with me to do a whole video about them. But it's XTC's Drums and Wires. I put this at number 7. Great album, very late to me. If you want to know my opinions more about XTC, just go back to my video with Ross, or maybe one of the other videos I've talked recently about XTC. I've become a huge, massive fan of them. Most people that know me well already know that, and it's very hard to rank their albums because they're all good in their own right. But this is the copy Ross and I found at a store, Deep End Records in Houston, and had to go back to a second time because as I passed the first time, then I realized that it was way better than the copy I had, so I ended up buying it upon a second visit. So very glad I did. Okay, number 6. This is a great album too, completely different than anything else I've shown here. This is a debut album from the B-52s. I've actually only had this on vinyl for a very short time, and this is the yellow vinyl version of it, and I bought it here locally, oh, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. But this is the ultimate party band. Just so much fun. You know, you can kind of tell from the cover that they you know, they don't take themselves too seriously, and it works perfectly, and I love it, and it's so much fun to listen to this record. It's certainly worthy of great albums from 1979. So B-52s went on to do a lot of great things, but I love that record. Okay, so we're in the top 5 now, is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, number 5, Damn the Torpedoes, from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. You know, a lot of people consider this his best album, and I can't argue with that. It's certainly great. Got Refugee, and Here Comes the Girl, and what are you gonna do? Don't Do Me Like That. You know, what can you say? What a career. So missed, and such a tragic loss last year to lose Tom Petty. And you still, every time you pull out a record to play him or hear him on the radio or talk about him, it's like, kind of a heavy heart. So just very sad. So Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Damn the Torpedoes, number 5. Now number 4 is a record or a band that I don't think I've ever talked about on this channel, but if you lived in America especially in this year, you would have seen this in the number 1 spot at the record store for a very long time. It was one of those records that just kept selling and selling and selling and selling, and that is Supertramps' Breakfast in America. And another record that I didn't really like at the time. It took me many years to really get this record, but I really became a Roger Hodgson fan. I think, excuse me, he's terrific. Take a sip of water. I can always edit that out if it's too annoying. Yeah, so you got, you know, Take the Long Way Home, and what else is on here? The Logical Song, so Goodbye Stranger. It's terrific, and again, you know, if you lived in the suburbs in America during that period of time, they pretty much gave you a copy of this and said you have to have it. I had to pause the video there because I was losing my voice and I didn't want to keep chugging water. So now we're up to the top 3 here, and I'm just going to go pretty fast. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about with each one of these albums, but I picked number 3, Japan, Quiet Life. I am such a huge fan of this band. And again, one of those acts that I didn't really pay any attention to until much later out in life. And I just love this album. This is a music on vinyl copy from 2011, I think. It's pretty old, actually, so this is long out of print, in fact. Limited black triple vinyl pack, so there's a lot of extras on here too. But what an amazing album, what an amazing band. And if you've never heard of Japan and never checked out the music or are more interested in it, I should do a complete video on Japan, because there is a lot to talk about. And I have a lot of solo records from David Sylvian too, and a lot of Japanese pressings and a lot of cool stuff. But this would be a wonderful place to start, just to get interested in the band, and probably one of the first places I started as well. Then number 2, I'm going to let speak for itself, because my good friend, again, Ross Goodall, just made a complete album review of this album, and he did a great job, as usual, talking about Talking Heads' Fear of Music and his ranking. And while I didn't agree with it entirely, it certainly did a great job of justifying you know, the songs and giving a bit of background information and stuff like that. So amazing record. You know, just I'll put a link to that video here, because I would say most of the people who are interested in this video would very much enjoy watching an album review from Talking Heads, Fear of Music. Number 2 for me from this year, and again, the list is just kind of random. And then finally, number 1, I guess not too, maybe a little bit too predictable, but this is Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures. And, you know, to me, this is the quintessential album of 1979. And, you know, again, I'm just so passionate. Every time you hear this album, it just transforms you to a very different place, and I love it. Absolutely love it. It's just dark and brooding and mysterious, and you know, it's just got a very unique sound to it, and to me, no one did it better, really. I know it's a bit of a myth now, and you know, it's the status of the whole thing since the suicide and everything kind of escalated this band into a whole different stratosphere. But I don't think it would matter. I think it would be just as powerful and important if Ian Curtis had lived to make many albums after this, but he only made 1. Fantastic album, and if for some reason you've never heard Joy Division, you only have 2 albums to pick from, really, but this is a mighty fine album. So that's my quick top 10, really. What did I miss? You guys have to comment, because I'm sure there's a long list of things that I may have missed, overlooked, forgot to pull out, haven't heard yet. You guys are smart. You guys know what I like. You know, don't put metal music in there. I'm not gonna like anything, really, for the most part. If you put in Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, it's not me. it has its place, it has its fans, it's great. It's just not me. You know, so if you have a suggestion about something you think I might additionally like, anything around something you've seen here, I'm all into I would love to hear more, because I'm constantly looking for stuff from this late 70s, early 80s period. And I'll stick to my story here and say I think 1979 may be the greatest musical year of all time. You know, you don't have to look too far on my list to see some absolutely classic albums. And I guess I will challenge anybody to tell me differently at this point. So there you have it. Sorry about the little break there, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I do have a couple other videos planned, one being the Paul Weller collection, Japan collection, and one I'll keep as a surprise. So there's, you know, it's not dark. The channel hasn't gone dark. At least I'm still around and doing a little bit better, as I promised from Record Store Day that I would try to do. So anyway, for now, I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.